Welcome to Season 4 of the Knack for Business podcast.
Question for the audience. How can you turn your unique perspective, even if you feel different, into a competitive edge that drives creativity and business success? JD will share how embracing neurodiversity, owning your own creative voice, and protecting your intellectual property can turn stories or ideas into thriving ventures. If you're building a startup or small business and want to stand out, listen and learn. See how you can harness that difference and master storytelling and build a brand that lasts. Our guest today, and he's a returning guest, is JD Barker. He's an international best-selling author whose work bridges the worlds of horror, thriller, and suspense. Once a shy kid devouring Hardy Boys and Dickens before discovering Shelley, Stoker, and Poe, he grew into a storyteller who first made his mark as a journalist and ghostwriter before breaking out into his debut novel, Forsaken, a book so compelling Stephen King gave Barker permission to use one of his iconic characters. Since then, JD has co-authored Dracula with Bram Stoker's family, written global bestsellers including The Fourth Monkey, collaborated with James Patterson. His novels have landed on major charts worldwide, won multiple awards, and sparked film festival and television deals. Today, JD continues to craft dark cinematic stories while helping shape the future of modern thriller fiction. JD, welcome back, sir. How the heck are you?
I'm doing great. I'm going to have you follow me around and just read that every time I walk into a room. That was perfect.
Thank you. I try. Practice makes perfect. How did discovering your autism at 22 reframe how you approach things using your creativity in business?
It honestly changed everything for me. So I was born in the 70s. So when I was growing up, they didn't look for autism. You know, you were basically the weird kid in the corner, you know, other kids didn't want to play with, teachers didn't want to deal with. But, you know, I basically grew up just kind of trying to feel it out for myself and figure it all out. And I mean, I did all right. I had no trouble studying. I got through school very easily. I managed to get some degrees in college and ended up in the corporate world. And I worked in finance. Ultimately, my last day job I was a chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm. And I was very good at it because it was working with data. You know, I basically monitored all the trading activity for the firm the previous day, compared that to all the rules and regulations we were required to follow and looked for exceptions. You know, you put that kind of task in front of any autistic person, they're going to excel at it. Where I ran into problems is when I actually found something, because then all of a sudden I had to leave my office and I had to go and talk to a person. And then things usually went south from there because it was more or less a confrontational situation. You know, somebody did something wrong and I had to talk to him about it. My boss at the time, to his credit, he recognized that I was good at one portion of the job, but had trouble with the people skills. And he honestly thought that I had anger management issues. So he sent me to a class for anger management. And at my initial meeting, I sat down with a therapist who runs the group. We talked for maybe about 20 minutes or so, and she stopped me and she said, "Hey, have you ever been tested for autism?" I had no idea what that really was at the time. I mean, I had seen the movie Rain Man, which, is not even close to realistic. But beyond that, I had no idea. But then she started pointing things out. She said, "Well, the whole time we've been talking, you haven't made eye contact with me. I've noticed you rub your thumb and your forefinger together whenever you're thinking." And she started rattling off all these things that I've done my entire life that I didn't really think twice about. But they all turned out to be autistic traits. So we did some testing and ultimately landed on a diagnosis of something called Asperger's syndrome. And once I had that, she basically put a problem in front of me that I could solve, so I started to research that and I learned everything I could about it. I made a list of the things that I consider to be problematic based on it. But I also made a list of the things that it allowed me to do that I wouldn't have been able to do without it. And there were quite a few. I was very good at writing computer code. I was very good at the written word, things like that. So I doubled down on the stuff that I was very good at. And I focused on, working towards correcting or fixing these other things. And I've been doing that ever since. I'm 54 now. So 30 some years I've been at it.
Well, you haven't aged much there, man. I mean, if you're listening to the audio, a nice, mature male voice, but visually, you look like you're in your 30s, lad. So just saying.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you get to sit home and just make shit up for a living. It's the stress that makes you grow the gray hair.
That's true.
Can I get that on a t-shirt? I want that on a t-shirt.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you to the day, like when I left the corporate world, having to work on that high stress, crazy environment, like everything changed about me. It's amazing how much getting rid of that kind of stuff will help you health wise. So that's a whole other podcast.
Here's a question that you've hinted at, but I'm really intrigued. We're starting to understand being neurodiverse? I have a couple of my own I won't share right now. How do you, if you have kids, how do you take them aside and say, you know what? Here's your extreme skill. Here's what others may not understand. You don't do as well as you could. I don't care about that. Let's work on what your circle of genius is. And I love you and I'll help you and Merry Christmas. Talk to me.
Yeah, so that's actually something I do quite a bit of. I work with a lot of parents of autistic children. I've got a daughter who's been diagnosed as being on the spectrum. She's 8 now, so it's out there. The differences in today's world, the support for that is there. In my daughter's case, she's got a team of people that circle around her. They adjust her studies, everything that happens in school, and she doesn't necessarily realize that she is different from the other kids just because we're able to dial in specifically, where she needs help and focus on that. One of the things I try to do though is I meet with a lot of parents that have autistic children, because if you've got, let's say, an 18-month-old baby, at home that is like literally beating its head against a wall to the point where it bleeds and screams every time somebody touches them, that's a scary thing, as a parent. And that's something that I did, when I was younger, so a lot of times for parents to be able to sit down with somebody like me and realize that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, it's very helpful. But pretty much every autistic person I've ever met, there's always one little thing that they excel at, and you have to be able to identify it. And sometimes parents are too close to the situation; they don't necessarily see it. A lot of times, it tends to be a creative thing. It's music related. It's something, typically with patterns. Patterns tend to be very proficient. But I help parents find that in their kid. And then once we're able to locate that, then they can double down on that, because now all of a sudden they've got something they can relate to their child with. It helps bring that child out of their and that opens a door that basically starts the conversation and the dialogue. It makes it easier to deal with some of the other things. So if you find that one thing that your kid really, really loves to do and you're able to encourage it, they are that much more willing to talk to you about all these other things that make them uncomfortable. In my case, with a daughter, that's been diagnosed, I was watching for it. Like I can spot other people that are autistic from across the room. It's like there's just something in her eyes or whatever. But we seek each other out. We know we're there. So when my daughter was born, I was watching for it, and I saw some things that made me think maybe, but then I saw so many others that made me think that she wasn't. She's very good in social situations. I was horrible at it. And she makes eye contact with everybody. I still can't do that unless I force myself to do it. But, there were other things that were there. And, ultimately when we had her tested, we isolated those and now we focus on them. So I think the world has changed in a lot of ways and made it easier. I think everybody is neurodivergent at some level across the board. The quote unquote norm is basically based on majority. That's really the only difference there. I think anybody who has, it's a strength or a weakness, and you can decide which way you want to focus.
So, one thing that we've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, and many of them got their aha moment after a pivot. Some got fired, some realized they were burning it down themselves and quit, some lost a loved one. And so, tell me about how long I can't do this anymore, till I'll be a writer. Oh my God, it's no good. What will I do now? I'll starve. Tell me that process. That's really interesting to me. By the way, he may edit it out, but woo, I'm a new author. Woo!
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I've been writing and reading my entire life. My parents always encouraged the writing aspect, but they always added the caveat. It's a fantastic way to make a great hobby, but you can't make a living at it. You have to get a real job, which is why I went off to college, got the degrees. It's why I ended up working behind a desk in the corporate world. I did what I was told I was supposed to do, but I would come home at night and I would write. Initially it was just working on my own stuff. That turned into working on other people's stuff. Ultimately, I landed on a side hustle working as a book doctor and a ghostwriter, basically helping other people get published. And I did that for 23 years while I was doing the corporate gig. I would come home and I would work on these other projects, but I got better at it over time. Like that basically honed my craft. And at one point I had 6 different books that hit the New York Times bestseller list that I had written that all came out with other people's names on the cover. And that gets very old after a while. So when that 6th one hit up, my wife pulled me aside. She said, listen, I know you hate the job, the day job. You want to become a writer. Let's find a way to make that happen. But at that point, we were kind of stuck because, chief compliance officer for a brokerage firm, I was making a very nice salary, and we had the trappings of that. We had a big house, we had cars, we had a boat, we had all the monthly expenses associated with that. So we couldn't just walk away from the job, because that would basically mean we were walking away from the lifestyle. So she came up with this crazy plan. We sold everything that we owned. We bought a tiny little duplex in Pittsburgh. We rented out one side to some tenants, and we moved into the other side. It was 800 square feet. We went down from 4,500. And I remember the day we did that, we sat down at the dining room table and we looked at the bank statement, and she said, well, it looks like you got about 18 months to make it as an author before we run out of savings. Go. And, there's nothing like putting your feet to the coals to make something happen. So that's how I did it. And I don't necessarily think everybody should try that, but I was comfortable. As much as I hated that job, I was comfortable in that job. And if I hadn't been pushed the way that she pushed me, I might still be doing that job.
It's
Corporate
interesting.
needs you too.
Yep.
It's interesting that having a spouse or someone with you to help, it's like looking at any given problem. Having two heads is better than one. Sometimes even more so if there's three, depending on the goals in the end. And when you did this shift, what I'm getting from this whole piece is, if you have a passion from a business perspective, right, to satisfy one's own soul, and if there's a kind of a hidden power that's inside you, to tap it and unleash it, what triggered the book writing? Because when you talk about doing compliance and you're going, hi, I can look at a document, I can look what's the transaction and going, yeah, here's the pieces that didn't jive, and this is where you have an issue that's going to come up to bite everybody. How did you transition? Because that's different than writing a book. And so how did that kind of morph into that lane? Because it's fantastic. And is it because your skill set doing compliance also is that of an author? And is that something people should look at? Listen, I'm doing this, I'm really good at this, but that trait, that functionality that I'm really good at, is also good in other industries?
No, I think that was the thing I had to do versus the thing that I wanted to do. You'll do whatever you have to survive, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's something you want to do. And I think that was the real difference for me. I would have done whatever job I had to support my family. But at the same time, I wrote because that's what kept me sane. That's what brought me back. So if I had a bad day at work and I went home and I worked on a story or something, that's what got me back to center. That's always been my happy place.
JD, you already, just from the other authors and coaches we've listened to, I'm hearing that storytelling is coming back as a lost art in corporate, and that entrepreneurs are being taught to tell their story better and more often. It makes you much more real and much less artificial. And I was wondering if you have a thought about storytelling in the corporate world.
I think it's the creativity that's key. I mean, if you think about it, in today's world, if you're going to sell a product, you got to somehow get everybody to notice it. And you're selling a widget, you've got to do something different than everybody else. In today's world, most people are selling those things on TikTok. So like you have to be creative. Like you can take a boardroom of people, they can sit down and they can brainstorm these ideas, but it's actually that video on TikTok doing something unique that causes people to stop and go, oh, I'm going to check that out. And then they click the little buy link. They create that impulse buy. It's a very different world from what it was 15 years ago, where everything was sold through television commercials or possibly a recommendation from a friend. In today's world, like we are scrolling social media for our news, for our events, to find out what our friends are up to. And at the same time, we are getting commercials, whether we like it or not, through these other things that kind of show up in the middle of our feed. Anybody who can capture the creativity and generate those commercials, they're the ones that are succeeding.
So how do you take that business meeting where someone says, well, Chuck, let's do this. And Bob goes, well, yes, Chuck, that's a great idea too. Having that, having the genesis, but it's not necessarily what you just said, converting it into a story or a TikTok. How do you do that translation? Even when you're doing your books, for example, right? You have an idea. Here's a storyline. You practice in the art of writing the horror fiction piece, but how do you translate it so that it flows through? And much the same way they would have to translate, here's a business idea, and it's kind of a pitch to tell that story. How do you make that transformation transpire?
Well, I mean, writing the book and selling the book are two very different hats. I take one hat off and I put the other hat on. For me, selling a book, it's no different than selling cereal. It's no different than selling bananas. I'm selling a widget. I'm selling a product. So I have to create a brand in order to do that. So I've researched that very heavily. But before I started writing books on my own, I researched other authors, figured out which ones were selling well. I looked at their branding, figured out why they're selling well. How are they getting in front of people? What are they doing differently? And I've incorporated as much of that as I possibly can into my own business. I mean, you can kind of see one of my books behind me, my reversed here. That's my latest title. It's called Something I Keep Upstairs. But if you zoom in and look closely at it, like my name is very large on the book, versus the title of the book. My name is actually a trademark version of my name that I own. So when the publishers put this out, they have to actually license my trademark back for me in order to put it on the cover of my own book. So even that's a moneymaker. Image, like the cover image itself, I hired the artist to actually create that. So I own that. So again, I sell that back and license it back to my various publishers rather than allowing them to create one for me. So, it's little dollars here and there, 200 here, 500 there, 1,000 over here, but, over 150 different countries, all those kind of little things start to add up. But as a general rule, whenever I finish up a book, I look at what everybody else is doing on that particular moment to sell books. I mean, once I figured out what everybody else is doing, I try to come up with something different that nobody is doing. So for this particular title, the story, it's a haunted house story, but the house in the book is actually real. I live on an island in New England, right off the coast of Portsmouth. I mean, the house in my story is on an even smaller island right off our coast called Wood Island. It's only about an acre in size. There's one house on it. It's about a quarter mile or so off the coast. But it's a real place. So when people read the book, they could visit it. So I knew that I could somehow capitalize on that. And I brainstormed about it for a little while. And then I came up with this contest. Ultimately, we gave away an overnight stay to one reader in the haunted house. So 30 days after publication of the book, we drew a name of one person. They were allowed to bring 3 of their friends. They came out to New England. We put them on a boat, brought them out to that haunted house on a private island, dropped them off on the dock and said, we're coming back in 24 hours. Have fun. And we left them there. So like when word of that contest came out, author writes book about haunted house and gives away overnight stay to one lucky fan. The press ate that up. They talked about it. It went all over social media. People on social media were talking about it. I still advertised the book, but it's that word of mouth that actually sold the book. If you went on social media at the time, people were chatting, like, I'll do it. Will you do it? I won't do it. I'll do it if you do it. But like all that talk is what actually moved the title. And, you can't do it again. That's the thing. Like, it can't be replicated. Another author can't, give an overnight stay in a haunted house away again. They could, but it's not going to have the same kind of impact that it did when I did it because I was first, which means for the next book, I've got to do something completely different again that nobody else has done. But I try to do that.
Did you spruce the house up for some seance-y type effects?
We don't have to do anything like that. This house is like the house has been there for a very, very long time. I found stories about the island dating back almost 400 years, about people dying out there and crazy events that happened out there. So if you believe in the paranormal, like there is already plenty of activity to go around. And yet it's fun because, like the book has been out since May. And if you actually go out to the island now, people are either hearing about the book and then visiting the island, or they're hearing about the book when they visit the island. A lot of them come back because it gives them the chance to walk the house that they just read about. There's people that will sit out there on the island on the beach and just listen to the audiobook or read the book. And, then they can actually turn around and walk into the house and go room by room where the story actually took place. It's like a completely, wild experience.
You going to turn it into a video game where you can walk through it through a 3D avatar?
No, we're going to leave it as is. I mean, in today's world, it's a museum, so like you can book a trip and you can go out there. They've got tours that go out there. But that was all part of this thinking process. So after the book came out, I worked with all those tour agencies, the people who own the island. They all sell copies of the book. They get copies at a discount. They sell it. They make a profit for themselves. But basically every, tour agency around this area is selling my book for me and creating additional word of mouth. And then people visit it. They jump online. They talk about it. That creates more buzz. So it's, it's something that just keeps going and going and going. If you think of, the example I used was the Stanley Hotel out in Estes Park, if you're familiar with the Stanley. But that's the place where Stephen King stayed when he came up with the idea for The Shining. It's a gorgeous hotel, but like when you research the history on it, it never turned a profit until The Shining came out. And then all of a sudden it became a tourist trap.
I think Jack Nicholson is possibly one of the most scary actors I have ever met.
He probably is. I honestly love that movie, but he comes across as crazy from jump. Like if you read the book, the character is supposed to start off sane and then gradually work his way there. But Jack Nicholson has that particular look about him. But it's a great flick. I've seen that one. I've seen the miniseries. I've seen them all.
JD, I think we would both agree that whether you like him or hate him, our good friend Mr. Bezos changed the entire publishing industry. There used to be a send letters to get rejected or find a sales agent, and there was this formulaic process that I think has all but been totally discounted now. If you think you have a gift, what's step one? I know what step 20 is, but what's step one after you've got some writing to give to somebody?
Yeah, I mean, once the book's got to be done, and I personally feel it's got to be a 5-star book before you share it with anybody. So, like my books, I've jumped through a lot of hoops. I've got alpha readers, I've got beta readers, I've got editors. All these people see the book before my agent even gets a chance to see it.
Okay.
And my general thinking is like you want to put the best possible product you can first in front of that agent, in front of that editor. You don't want them to pick it up and say, well, this has promise, but it's not quite there yet. If you hand them something where it is 100%, that works for you across the board. You've got an agent that gets excited. They contact an editor. That editor gets excited. If you go back 15, 20 years, if an editor found a book that they liked but needed work, they could take it on. They had the ability to take on some projects, had passion projects. In today's world, they just can't. They've got a stack of books on their desk a mile high. They're looking for that finished product, and they will pay you very well for it. If you turn in a book that doesn't need any work or is very minimal, they're going to pay you a lot more than they would for something that needs to hire somebody like me. Back in the day, they were hiring me as a ghostwriter, a book doctor to fix it. That barely happens anymore because they don't have the budget for it. They don't have the time for it. Let's say the other thing I see happen quite a bit is people will write a book, they'll send it off to agents, they get rejection letters. And then they just decide, well, I'm just going to put it out on Amazon and publish it myself. That too is a mistake. You don't want to do that. What you really need to do is figure out why are people turning it down. Reach out to those agents, try and get the reasons. There is a reason that they said no. And a lot of times these are things that can be fixed. So use that feedback to fix the book. If you don't do that, if you just hit the publish button, a couple of things are going to happen. Your book will come out on Amazon. Your friends and family will find it. They're all going to give you 5 stars because that's what friends and family do. But then real readers are going to stumble into it. And all of a sudden, they're going to start picking out the flaws that all these other people saw, and your rating is going to go down to 2, 3. You get these smaller ratings. They're going to point it all out, and then that becomes your history, your pattern. So the next time you put a book out and an agent queries you, they're going to see that on Amazon. They're going to see the rating that you got on the last book. They're going to see that book sitting at $1.5 million in the Kindle store. That's who you are to them. You are those numbers. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So no matter what you do, whether you indie publish, you traditionally publish, you got to get that book as polished as possible before it gets in front of anybody else.
So IP of that work that you've just done, how do you protect it? I know the auto answer is get a lawyer. If you're just starting out, the budget might not be there to sustain a lawyer in that particular field. Is there a way to do this that makes it affordable?
You always need a lawyer, and most of them will work at, on a percentage. Like my film and TV guy takes a percentage of my film and TV deals. I don't actually write checks per hour for him. I mean, you can obviously pay somebody by the hour if you want to, but there are guys out there that are fantastic that are willing to go the other way. IP is something I think a lot of people, they don't really think about, but you need to. I mean, if you look like Tom Clancy, like right now, the Jack Ryan character, like that has been in limbo and in court, because of documents that he signed years and years and years ago. They're trying to figure out who actually owns that particular trademark. TV shows are being made, a lot of money is being made, and a lot of people have their hands out, trying to figure out who's actually collecting on that. And a lot of it is because the IP wasn't straightforward as far as the paperwork goes. And that happens very easily. I've got 8 different projects right now, what I call various stages of Hollywood hell. And in those contracts, I lose a lot of rights to my IP. So like my 4MK series right now, it just got its 4th option. There are certain characters that I can't write about in other books because, certain studios own rights to those characters until those options expire. So you've got to make sure you understand all of that and try to get your just dues when it comes to the percentages on the various things.
Is that ever an issue? Say you write a story about a character, and if you call him Bob, I'm using that name rather loosely, but or Dracul. You can do a horror character. And someone all of a sudden you see someone else doing a write up or doing their own book, and all of a sudden you're going, well, hang on. There's certain elements that are starting to line up. Like Dracula's Dracula. So yeah, there's fangs, there's blood, there's longevity. Occasionally, bad sunburn is the issue, or a stake in the heart. Those typical things. Is there a time? Is there kind of a point in time you're going, yeah, this is no longer common ground. Now you're actually copying my character, my style. How do you sort that out? Is there
It
like a
happens.
percentage?
No, I mean, it happens all the time. I'll give you an example. So I've got a book called A Caller's Game. It's about a radio DJ and somebody calls in and confesses to murder live on the air. A few years ago, a Mel Gibson movie came out that had a very similar plot line. And I started getting all these emails and texts from friends and from fans and stuff telling me, hey, you need to watch this because it's really similar. And I was getting these while A Caller's Game was in development. So I sat down and watched the movie, and they were right. There were literally like text, dialogue, things that were lifted directly from the book. But he related to that production definitely read the book and had their highlighter out. So all of that information went off to the attorneys. The attorneys looked at it. Unfortunately, that movie didn't make any money. So like even though things were lifted, there's nothing to go after. It's very easy to prove the IP theft because it was blatant. But there's nothing you can do about it because from an accounting standpoint, there's no money to go chase down. All you can do is just kind of on to the next project. It happens to all of us.
JD, you've obviously built a brand without a lot of Schedule One backing. Tell me the scrappiest marketing move that worked that you still brag about.
Ooh, I'd have to think about that. I don't know if I have anything that I would consider to be scrappy. I think I'm just very consistent, I think, in what I do. Everything, when I find something that works, I make sure I continue to repeat it. I try a lot of new things all the time to see what sticks. For every 10 ideas I have, maybe one might actually work. But then I'll come up with 9 new ones and, another 9 and another 9. So if anything is, not necessarily scrappy, but just like being consistent in the process, I think is key. Just because something falls flat on its face, it doesn't mean you should, pull up and give up on the entire project. It just means you need to dust yourself off, get back up and try again in a different way.
So where do you see the book industry or the author industry going? Do you see it more still, as Wayne would call them, the dead trees showing up in your hand, or is it more electronic? I suspect it's going to still be paper because it doesn't degrade as fast as some electronics do. But do you see it going that way, or do you see it going more electronic? And like when I order a movie on one of the major platforms, and they provide cable service, yeah, you can rent the movie or you can buy it, but it's stored on their platform. If you change hosts, all of a sudden it's vaporware, it's gone. Do you see it drifting in that lane? And is that where life's going to lead us?
I think that's where the corporate side of it wants it to go because that's where they make the most money. But if you take a step back and you look at how it's actually played out, like when ebooks first came out, a lot of people adopted the technology mainly because it was new. It was something unique. It's something they wanted to try because now all of a sudden you could carry 500 books with you, in the palm of your hand, which you couldn't do before. But what I think I've seen over the last couple of years is a lot of people have made that switch back. Like for me personally, like I've got a table off to the side here. You can't see it, but there's a bunch of, paper books on there, hardcovers and paperbacks. And when I want to relax, I pick up one of those. But I've got books on my Kindle, on my phone. I'll read that when I have to. If I'm on an airplane or I'm traveling, I've got that as an option. When I go for a run, I listen to an audiobook. So that's another whole format, that people are using. But if you look at the sales trends, like paper books kind of dropped for a little while because of the ebooks and stuff coming out. Now it's coming back for a lot of those reasons. People that were doing all this electronic stuff before, they're realizing that it's way more relaxing to pick up a paper book than it is to have, your phone in front of you with text messages coming in while you're trying to read that book. So even younger kids are jumping on paperback books and hardcovers and print. And I think TikTok honestly plays a big part of that. One of the things that I do from a marketing standpoint is we send out a lot of copies, probably 500 to 1,000 copies of every one of my books to influencers on social media. In today's world, they use those as props, so they'll film a video, they're holding that book. And because they're holding a physical book in their hand, the people watching that video, they want that same thing, so you'll see a lot of people buy books just because of that. So I really think paper is I don't think it's going anywhere. I think, a couple hundred years from now, I think we're still going to be picking up, paper books.
It would be interesting to me to have a university study of the same book being read by 100 people on Kindle, 100 people on Dead Trees, and actually record the brain waves of both. That would be interesting to me.
Yeah, and it's going to be different. Just like if you compared it to somebody who was listening to it on an audiobook, they're going to absorb different portions of those books because of the different methods that they're taking it in. I'm a fan of doing both sometimes at the same time. Listen to the audiobook while the print is in front of me and following along. I've been doing that with my daughter to teach her to read. So there's a lot of different ways you can incorporate all these things.
So, swinging back to where we started off originally, we were talking about autism and people being on the spectrum. Is there any new research that's coming out that to help people understand more whether you're the person that is on the spectrum to the person that is around, whether it's the parents or family members? Is there any new research that's coming out that say, hey, this makes life a lot easier if you do this approach?
Yeah, there's tons of new stuff coming out all the time. Like my daughter, being in elementary school, like she's got a team around her that work with her very closely. She learns a little bit differently than some of the other kids do, but they've doubled down on that. They figured out what works and what's not working, and they use the stuff that is working to try and build on the rest. So they're very good at spotting those different things. Something that I learned the other night. My daughter has had trouble with reading, which is why we work with her very closely on it. We've learned that if she does fake voices as she reads, she actually reads much better. So she throws on an English accent while she's reading a book. Like she has far less trouble focusing on those words and getting everything out. If you speak to a neuropsychologist about it, what's basically happening is because she's focusing on two different things, she's focusing on reading and creating the voice, it's forcing her brain to be laser focused on what's in front of her, which means that she's absorbing that information a lot more. So something as silly as just, using a fake voice when you read a book, or when a little kid is reading a book can change, how well they do. And it turned it into a fun experience for her where now she looks forward to it. Whereas, prior to that, it was a task that she didn't want to do. Not necessarily an autistic thing, but it's, just a training tool, something that her teachers were observant of and brought it up, and we tried it and it worked.
You're obviously trying to inform and entertain, and I think that's spectacular. But if we had an audience that could help you, what would be your absolutely perfect person to meet to help you build their or your business?
I'm always looking for that one person who hasn't read before and all of a sudden, picks up one of my books and gets hooked and then reads like the next five. And they're out there. I almost see it as a challenge. Like when somebody comes up to me and tells me they don't read anymore, they don't have time to read or this or that. I like to win those people over.
Quick question. Metrics, book success. What are your tells that a book's about to take off? I mean, obviously, if it rockets, right, the numbers you'll see it in the cash coming back in. But what are your indicators that hey, this thing's about to go off like a wildfire?
Honestly, it's the reviews. I watch those very closely. Like the last book that I wrote with James Patterson, it's called The Writer. We were averaging, I think, 4.67 on Goodreads or something before it came out with the advanced readers. We knew we were onto something with that, and then when it hit the masses, when it was finally released, it took off like a rocket. That's probably the first indicator. I use a lot of those reviews that come in from a process standpoint. We use a company called NetGalley, which puts the book out in front of people before it's actually released. And they provide initial reviews, and those reviews go up on Goodreads. I use a lot of those for ads, so when 5-star reviews come in, I use those to create the advertisement. And I see a lot of the same phrases, a lot of the same sentences, a lot of the same points brought up over and over again in those reviews. And that allows us to dial it in even closer. With this last book, I've been playing with AI as much as I can, trying to find uses for it. It's not capable of writing a fiction book, and I would never go there. But what it is good at is I can drop 1,000 reviews into it, and it can tell me what people like about that book. One sentence, what do people like about this book? Here's all the reviews on Amazon, and it will pick through and give me, concisely what is actually resonating with people. And a lot of times it's not necessarily what I think it is, but that allows me to create buzzwords because the reviewers are using particular buzzwords. Once I have those buzzwords, I can use those in Amazon and Facebook ads, and that ends up recruiting in more people. And it's a lot more of a targeted approach than what we've done in the past.
what one point do you want to leave with our listeners? And two, how can they get a hold of you if they want to take on that challenge and read 5 of your books?
I think the one point that I want to drive home is if you're out there doing something that you don't like because you feel like you have to, and you've got the one thing you do want to do, take the time to find a way to make that one thing happen. Before you know it, you're going to be sitting on a porch rocking back and forth going, what if? So pull the trigger on that thing you actually want to try. To find me, it's pretty easy. I'm at jdbarker.com. I'm on all the social medias at jdbarker. And the books are pretty much in every bookstore.
Thank you.
JD, I want to say thank you so much. I appreciate coming back again for a second round on this podcast. Always a pleasure to have a chat with you, understanding the publishing world, understanding the horror genre. In this case, also understanding, the unique skills we all have and how to bring them forward to making us happy at the same time. And to Wayne Pratt for being my co-host, and you, the Knack for Business listeners. Folks, if you're listening here and you kind of want to do a quick sum check, JD helps creatives and entrepreneurs turn unique perspectives into powerful stories and profitable ventures. So, just following his pattern. Let's listen to what's been going on. Check out his books. It's on Amazon.com or .ca if you happen to be in Canada.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVISIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter u.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motive8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.